The world watched. Cameras rolled. Journalists whispered. The United Nations Global Security Summit in Geneva had just begun. Leaders filed into the massive conference hall. Names gleamed on gold nameplates, each one precisely positioned. One chair in particular stood out, reserved for Captain Ibrahim Traoré of BurkinaFaso. Right beside it, a name even louder, Donald J. Trump. But then, something shifted. Trump froze mid-step. He glanced at Traoré's seat, frowned, then leaned toward his aide. Moments later, an assistant scurried forward, lifted Trump's nameplate, and placed it on a chair across the room, far away. Gasps echoed. Cameras zoomed in. A hush swept through the hall like a cold wind. Yet Captain Traoré didn't flinch. He stood there, calm, unbothered, unshaken. Why is Trump avoiding him? A reporter tweeted. Trump just refused to sit next to Captain Traoré. Live humiliation or something deeper? The question lingered as Traoré moved to a seat alone, eyes locked on Trump across the aisle. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a blade. No one spoke. And then, when no one expected it, Traoré leaned in, adjusted his microphone, and cleared his throat. The moderator hadn't even opened the summit yet. But something in his composure made the room hold its breath. I am here, he began, his voice steady. Not to make enemies, but to tell the truth. Reporters edged forward. CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera switched to live broadcast. He continued. If a man refuses to sit beside you, ask yourself, what truth does he fear? The room froze. Trump's jaw tightened. He whispered his aide again, but Traoré didn't break eye contact. He paused and spoke with even more calm. I came here because my people do not eat speeches. They eat rice. They drink clean water. They sleep in peace. I did not come for politics. I came for life. Some in the room teared up. Delegates from Mali, Niger, and parts of Europe nodded ever so slightly. He hadn't raised his voice once, yet his words struck harder than any shout could. Within 2 hours, that clip had been reposted 37 million times. What happened next wasn't on any agenda. Just as the moderator tried to steer things back on track, something unusual unfolded. A woman, gray-haired, French-accented, dignified, stood up from the EU delegation. She didn't wait for a microphone or permission. Her voice trembled. I have sat in these rooms for 30 years, she said, and I have never heard someone speak like that, without anger, without fear, with so much truth. She gestured at Traoré. You, Captain, you remind me of Patrice Lumumba of Sankara. You speak for Africa, but somehow you speak for us all. The room fell silent. Traoré didn't blink. He simply nodded in quiet gratitude. Across the hall, Trump sat stiffly, arms folded. The moderator, flustered, cleared his throat. Let's begin with the first agenda, but it was too late. The summit was no longer about climate or oil or policy. It was about presence, about dignity. For the first time in decades, someone from a small nation had shifted the balance of power in that room, using only his words. And yet, this was just the beginning. Outside the glass walls, a protest was taking shape. Hundreds gathered, waving handmade signs. Dignity for Africa. Stand with Traoré. Let truth speak. They weren't only Burkinabe. They were students from France, doctors from Ghana, exiled journalists, even retired U.S. veterans holding up peace signs. Inside, delegates' phones buzzed with updates. A live feed showed the crowd growing. One woman held up a picture of her son, killed in a drone strike years ago. Tears streaked her face as she whispered, he only wanted a school, not a war. Inside, Traoré sat still, eyes lower for a moment. He'd seen things no camera could capture. Children dying from bad water, mothers feeding 3 kids with single yam. Trump sat across the room, stone-faced, arms crossed, pretending the swelling support meant nothing. But it meant everything. For the first time, the voice of a small, often ignored country had reached the gates of power. And inside, the pressure rose. Someone had to respond. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the next voice wasn't a seasoned diplomat. It was a teenager. A trembling hand rose. The moderator hesitated. You're not on the list, But the young man stood anyway. Brown skin, nervous eyes, a UN Youth Observer badge hanging from his neck. "I don't need to be on a list," he said softly. "I just need 5 seconds." The cameras zoomed in. He turned to Traoré, voice shaking. "My name is Kofi. I was born in a refugee camp in Niger. I watched my father die waiting for medicine that never came. But last year, I heard about a young captain who took back the gold from the West and gave it to the people." Kofi paused, tears brimming. "You inspire me to study leadership. Today, I skipped school just to see you speak. Not a single I stayed dry. Even delegates who'd come to bicker over policy felt their throats tighten." Traoré rose, walked over to the boy. He didn't speak. He simply placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder and nodded. That single gesture said more than any prepared statement ever could. And then, unexpectedly, Trump pushed his mic forward. All eyes turned. Was he finally going to explain why he refused to sit beside Traoré? Trump tapped the mic once, his face rigid, measured, but instead of speaking, he pushed his chair back and stood up. All eyes followed him. He straightened his suit, glanced around the room, then turned and walked out of the summit without uttering a single word. Gasps rose like a wave. One delegate whispered, "He's walking away from the conversation." Others sat frozen, disbelief painted on their faces. Cameras captured every step as Trump exited, ignoring reporters shouting his name. Captain Traoré remained silent. His face didn't flinch. He simply watched him leave, calm, still dignified. Then Traoré leaned into the microphone, voice low but ringing clear. "When silence becomes a tool of power, we must answer with truth, not rage." The hall erupted in thunderous applause. But deep inside, something heavy stirred in Traoré. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. Exhausted from always having to prove his place in rooms he'd earned. Tired of watching African leaders laugh at while their people carried the weight of broken promises. But now the world was watching him. And he knew he had to say something next that no one would forget. Something that would break people wide open. And so he waited for the perfect moment. Captain Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly as the cameras caught every breath, every steady blink. The world watched, but they could never see the heaviness he carried. In his mind were faces of his people. The dusty streets of Ouagadougou, hungry children playing near cracked wells, mothers who prayed every night for just one safe dawn. Beneath the table, his hands clenched. He had fought for years, against colonial shadows, against powerful nations that saw his homeland as small, expendable. But tonight was not just a summit, it was a trial by fire. Could he show the world BurkinaFaso's strength without shouting? Could he speak for the farmers who lost their fields to foreign greed? For the students who dropped out to feed siblings? For the elders who watched grandchildren vanish into distant cities with no hope of return? All eyes were on him now. The pressure weighed like iron on his chest. His lips moved in a silent vow. To never forget, to never bow, to always stand for dignity. And in that quiet, a deep resolve settled inside him. Then, from a far corner, the room shifted again. A young delegate from Canada, no older than 28, rose to her feet. She wasn't on the agenda. She didn't care. "I must speak," she said, her voice trembling yet strong. She took a breath, eyes shimmering. "I come from a land of privilege, but my heart aches for those left behind, for people like those Captain Traoré speaks for." She turned, looking directly at him. "You remind us that real leadership isn't about power. It's about sacrifice." The hall stilled. She spoke of her grandmother, a war survivor who taught her that courage echoes louder than guns. "I believe in your vision, Captain," she said, tears threatening to fall. "And I stand with you." Traoré's eyes softened. He gave a small, grateful nod. For one fragile moment, the walls of politics and prejudice cracked. Humanity seeped through. Even Trump, now standing at the back of the hall, arms crossed, looked unsettled. The summit was no longer what anyone expected. And outside, the chants swelled louder. Justice, justice, justice. Finally, the time came. Traoré was called to speak last. He rose, every muscle steady under the harsh lights. The room sank into silence. He looked at every face, every camera lens, every distant watcher tuning in from living rooms and cafes around the world. Then, voice calm yet unyielding, he began. My people taught me this. Dignity is never given, it is earned. He paused, letting the weight settle. When those in power refuse to sit beside us, it is not only a refusal of space, it is a refusal to see us as equals. The audience held its breath. Many eyes shone with unshed tears. But I do not come here asking for their permission, he continued. I come to demand justice, not just for BurkinaFaso, but for every nation whose voice has been silenced. The hall froze. Then, from the front row, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet in a roaring ovation. His quiet words had cracked something open. But even as the applause shook the walls, the tension crept back in like a chill. As the noise faded, all eyes returned to him, waiting, needing more. Traoré's calm gaze swept over them. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the weight of generations on his shoulders. And then he spoke again. When a leader refuses to sit beside you, it is not just about a chair. It is about refusing to respect you, to see you. His voice was steady, carrying all the buried stories of his people. But I do not seek the respect of those who never respected my ancestors. He took a breath. The hall so quiet they could hear his heartbeat through the mic. In Burkina Faso, children walk miles for clean water. Mothers bury their dreams alongside their babies. We are not a people of speeches. We are a people living the cost of the world's neglect. Many in the room looked away, eyes brimming. I am not angry, he said, his voice gentle yet unbreakable. I am hopeful, because even in this silence, I see the strength of my people, the power of truth. He paused, looking into the camera. We will not be ignored any longer. A single tear slipped down his cheek. Somewhere in the back, a camera caught it in perfect clarity. The tear of a leader who refused to break. After Traoré's words, an unexpected ripple swept the room. Delegates whispered fiercely. Some lifted their phones, pushing the speech out to the world. Social media exploded. Hashtags like #StandWithTraore and #Dignity for Africa soared to the top of trending lists. Backstage, journalists jostled for quotes. Meanwhile, Traoré sat down slowly, hands folded, eyes clear, heart pounding like a drum. He had spoken for the silenced, for millions who had never been heard. And across the hall, Trump's expression flickered. Was it regret, confusion, or disbelief? No one could tell. But the truth was clear. Traoré's calm had sparked a quiet rebellion, one not fought with weapons, but with presence, with dignity, with truth. And outside, the people's chants grew louder than ever. Weapons were never drawn, but courage and truth were sharper than any blade. Outside, the protests roared louder. Inside, something shifted in people's hearts. For the first time, the summit wasn't just about politics. It had become about justice. Just when it seemed the moment couldn't grow any more charged, an announcement echoed through the hall. There would be a surprise press conference immediately after. The air buzzed with curiosity and tension. Traoré rose, carrying the weight of a continent on his shoulders. His eyes held no defiance, only a gentle, humble smile. The room held its breath as he stepped up the mic. The crowd outside waiting too, live feeds capturing every word. I do not stand here to divide, he said softly, his voice steady as a heartbeat. I stand here to unite, to remind us all that true leadership is service. Service to every child who deserves a future. For a moment, the world went still. Even the skeptics felt something undeniable. Hope. Because sometimes the strongest revolution doesn't come from fist-pounding tables, but from words spoken with courage. Traoré's words were already echoing far beyond that hall. News of the summit's moment spread like wildfire. Videos of Trump refusing to sit beside Traoré were everywhere, but it was Traoré's calm that captured the world heart. From the dusty roads of Ouagadougou to the skyscrapers of Manhattan, millions watched, stunned, moved. People began to share their own stories. Times they've been overlooked, ignored, pushed aside, but found strength in their quiet dignity. Suddenly, Traoré wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol. He wasn't perfect, And that's what made him real. His humility, his unshakable calm, made people believe in something they'd forgotten, that the impossible could be possible. Every retweet, every post, every whispered conversation added kindling to a fire that had no borders. It wasn't about BurkinaFaso alone. It was about every corner of the world where people dream of standing tall. Behind closed doors, away from the camera's glare, Traoré found a quiet corner to breathe. A young aide approached him, voice trembling. "Captain," she whispered, "the world is watching. They're inspired. But there are some who want to silence this moment." Traoré turned to window, eyes distant yet clear. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. Truth has a way of breaking down walls, but the path is never easy. His thoughts flickered to the nights he'd lain awake, wondering if it was worth it, the friends who'd stood by him, and those lost along the way. But then he pictured the children, their bright, hopeful eyes in villages where wells had gone dry. He clenched his fist, not in anger, but in promise. "For them, I will keep speaking." That night, long after the cameras shut off and the crowds dispersed, a leader sat alone, his heart full of resolve. He vowed not to bow, not to break, to keep standing, no matter what. The next day, headlines blazed across the world. Traoré's triumph, when silence spoke louder than words. Talk shows and news desks buzzed. Some scoffed, some cheered, but most felt something rare and quietly powerful, a stirring they couldn't shake. In classrooms, teachers played a video for wide-eyed students. They spoke of courage, of how dignity sometimes stands silent but unmovable. In coffee shops, strangers leaned close, debating what it means to respect one another. And far beyond Geneva, protests rose, not against Traoré, but for the dignity he embodied. This was no longer the story of two men and an empty seat. It was bigger than any headline. It was about each of us, about standing tall when the world tries to push you down. It was about refusing to be made small when silence tries to swallow your voice. And the question whispered in classrooms, chanted on sidewalks, scribbled onto signs and hashtags wasn't, "What did Traoré say?" It was, "What will we say when it's our turn?"